Hello, this is me, Sampurna Chattarji. First time on Instagram Live, reading poetry. I hope there are people out there. I hope you can hear me. Send a message if you can't, so that I ramp up the volume. I can see people waving at me. I wave right back. Quite marvelous to see the names coming in. I'm going to do a little 2 minute of enjoying the feeling of the audience. This is really a very incredible experience, isn't it? Funny that we had to be in such a situation to experience some of these delights. So I guess I should start now because I do only have 15 minutes. And I want to make sure that everybody gets the most of their own set, as well as the entire hour that has been planned so beautifully. Thank you, Mansi, for being the technical coordinator and coping with our inadequacies. And of course, thanks to Ashwini for putting the panel together, as it were. More than a panel, this is the terminology of the real world that I use. On the virtual world, this feels like a kind of disembodied yet very essential conversation, a dialogue of some sort. A dialogue that is possible because we each are reaching out to each other from our private cocoons. And outside these safe, poetry-loving, poetry-writing cocoons, fires of all kinds rage. In December, on the last day of December to be precise, I wrote a poem which I thought I will begin my set with today because time has always been a major predilection in my work. And on the last day of the last year, time felt pressing and urgent and violent and frightening in very many new ways. And this is what I wrote. It's time to learn a new language. The language of raised fists and linked arms. The language of signs, vocal and strident, witty and rude. The language of candles, resistant to the wind. The language of palms, cupped around the language of flame, the language of scarves, bound tightly around the ears and under the chins on the coldest night of the year. The language of babies, bottle-fed by their indomitable mothers as they march. The language of grass growing softly under the feet that gather like storm. The language of rose, the language of thorn. The language of knees and foreheads kneeling and bending. The language of windows thrown open to let in the roar. The language of laughter, of listening against the noise. The language of the table at which the strangers gather. The language of glass, of paper, of pen. The language of seasons turning into years, weather turning into climate. The language of ice and hearth, of pelt, of shore, the language of shame, of the river that will not be forded, the blood that should not be spilled. The language of being without besiegement, alive. The language of healing, already before the new wound comes. At that time in December, I had no way of knowing what this new wound would be. Here we are in the middle of that new wound, experiencing all kinds of unimaginable pains, even if they are at second hand. We are feeling them deeply. And it is a time of perhaps greater uncertainty than we are used to coping with. A few years ago, my friend K. Srilata, who read yesterday on this very same platform, co-edited a book, a collaboration, a poetry project between India and Ireland. I collaborated with Klaus Ankerson, and in this book I find a poem titled Uncertainty, which I thought would be appropriate to read today. Uncertainty. Uncertainty is nothing to worry about, in quantum physics, that is. Uncertainty keeps our sun shining, keeps atoms from imploding, even ensures a vacuum isn't empty. Fooled you there. Simple physics. On a blackboard, a delta, sign of estuary, mouth of river, swallowing, river fish tasting of sea, millions of little bones. Oh, the sweet and salt taste of the fresh water flesh. Floods with meaning beyond my innumerate brain. The granularity of the smallest things interests me in this world. You can read these words because we don't have the energy to overcome mutual electric repulsion. I will tunnel through the barrier I cannot leap over. How do we proceed when nothing is clear? Lostness is all. I crossed the plank, constant, over the turbid seas of my quotidian toil. I spoke a pirate out of a hat, folding one line over. I waited for you to write the next, expecting nothing short of the miraculously connected. The exquisite corpse of our tandemness. As long as we exist fleetingly and disappear when our time is up, there's nothing to worry about. Both wave and stream discreetly nudging along the tidal shores of overlapping worlds of lip and tongue. Briny, come home. I have been rubbing a single grain of sea salt between my fingers, feeling it swell towards enormity, incomprehension. And I guess all of us are seized with different kinds of incomprehension at the enormity of this thing we are in between. And yet, what comes to mind is happier times when the only fear was traveling to the Badlands of Noida years ago on a school visit. And at a time when travel is impossible, even to the next neighborhood, forget the next city and the next country, here's a poem called Travel Advisory. Leave the city and learn to lose your way. Be trustful of a guiding stranger on a motorbike, hat pulled hard over his eyes, hitting the rutted road with the speed of one who is unafraid of accidents. Remember everything. The bulrushes, the underpass, the twisted morning, glen, marsh, landfill, mustard flowers. Through the cloud fields, the wreckage of a new town. And sitting right under it is a poem which was about, I have to say, it's in the past, was about everyday, ordinary separations. But in this age of everyday, extraordinary, imposed separations, here it is. Would not need. If we saw each other every day, I would not need your teeth. Would not need dream, catapult. Would not need the alibi of a god. Would not need the ability to replay second by second the sequence of a brushing kiss, an arm slowly unwrapping itself from around my silent shoulders. Would not need remorse. If we saw each other every other day, I would need new skin. Would need the gut of a Trojan horse, the crystal of a cocktail stirrer, the unnumbered periodic hope. Would need basalt, the shape of a naked head, mouth open to the skies, breasts pointed to the wind, the bump of belly and mound, a giant mountain in which you move. The unnumbered periodic hope. I think this is a good time for me to shift the tempo, not necessarily the tempo, but at least the coloration of the poems, and read a poem which I wrote for my children's book long ago, still in circulation, but a poem I don't think I've ever read it. I've been thinking about travel, of course, about the lifeline that in Bombay has ground to a halt, the trains. And though I have written a book with my dear friend Karthika Naïr on the Bombay trains, over and underground in Mumbai and Paris, that's not the book I'm going to read from. I'm going to read from The Fried Frog, and this poem is called The Electric Caterpillar, from an ongoing, never completed, nonsense novel in verse and prose, titled, working title for the last 10 years, The Boy Who Had Never Seen a Town. So here it is, The Electric Caterpillar. Crowded with bodies, clouded with noise, hissing and spitting, teeming with poise. The shakier it seemed, the speedier it was. The more you got worried, the less there was cause. An electric caterpillar, a racing centipede, a partitioned rattlesnake, a many-windowed steed. Wires above and tracks below and people in between. Looked like this creature had haste in every gene. Taking people here and there, never getting tired. Back and forth and in and out, so awfully inspired. A dash of thought, a local dash, a dashing school, all cool and brash. Into it we jumped, us three, me and boy and croc and dog, all entangled, unsteady as a rock. Inside the creature snug we sat, swaying with the motion, while all about us drifted the most impossible commotion. Talking, fighting, eating, sleeping, dreaming, cursing, reading, weeping, playing cards and singing songs, buying rights and selling wrongs. And though on dry land we raced, many a tidal wave we braced, as surges of people rose and fell and came and went as in a spell. And then at last we had arrived, and I could smell the sea. After all those salty people, it was refreshing as could be. And you see here Priya Kurian's beautiful illustrations of the crowded Bombay trains. I'll move on now to a poem about... Hello, sorry, this was... There was, as there often are, a technological glitch. So here I am back. Clearly the universe is telling me to hurry up. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to read the Space Gulliver poem, which I had planned to and which I had begun. I'll just read the end of it, because he says, right at the end, the patience of rooms that she would give anything to learn, but not just yet, not when she has finally learned how to breathe again, and her body flesh again, and her heart unbroken. It took her 21 days. Forgive me, dragon, she says, with new tenderness. It wasn't you that hurt me. I can ride you now alone. Here, let me breathe for you. Steam in your mouth, salve in your wound. The sword I must now remove from your side. And what I will do is what I had planned before I was cut off, is to read a poem, if there are enough people listening in, that is. Mansi, maybe you can give me a sign. And I will read it for those who are here, who are patient, who have stayed on, irrespective of all the hiccups. This one is a poem by Nirendranath Chakraborty, a reputed, very well-known, very well-regarded Bengali poet. I'm going to read a translation by my father, Chattarji. The book Six Bangla Poets was launched 2 years ago in Kitab Khana, in the actual space, a memorable occasion where up to 8, I think, foremost Anglophone poets read the translations for my dad while he read a few originals. I'm going to read Diagnosis by Nirendranath Chakraborty, translated by Chandak Chatterjee. He felt his pulse, pulled out his tongue, listened with the stethoscope to the boy's heart and lungs. Then, scratching his head, the doctor said, "Can't understand a thing. I'm getting some sense of the symptoms, but can't really tell if they are the symptoms of the disease or the medicines." Waving the bunch of prescriptions from doctors consulted earlier, I asked, "Then, what then?" Throwing up his hands, the doctor said, "For the moment, stop those pills and potions for a week, then bring him back to me." Coming out onto the road, we didn't get a bus. There had been some trouble somewhere, that's why the buses and trams had stopped running. The acrid smell of ammonia hung in the air. Somewhere close by, a cracker went off without warning, and pat came the reply, "Cot, cot, cot, cot." I said, "The symptoms are not good." My son said, "Of the disease or the medicines? That's what I really can't tell."